It's September 23rd, 2012, the Singapore Grand Prix, round 14 of what many consider to be the greatest season of all time. Fernando Alonso heads into the race with a 37-point lead in the championship over his closest challenger, Lewis Hamilton. Coming off the back of a win in Monza and taking pole on Saturday, the momentum was starting to shift back in his favour. A late charge towards his second world title was still on the cards. Lewis controlled the race from the moment the lights went out. But on lap 13, after the first round of pit stops, he noticed something wasn't quite right with the car. A funny feeling, as he put it. And then, we get to lap 23.
Hamilton has been in a class of his own all weekend, hasn't he, David?
We've got a problem for Hamilton.
Hamilton's in trouble.
He's lost drive.
Another failure to finish for Hamilton by the looks of it. His World Championship hopes are disappearing rapidly with that.
That was it. Race over. And any shot at making a championship comeback gone with it. Sebastian Vettel would go on to win that race, catapulting him from 4th in the driver's standings to 2nd. This was the spark that turned his fortunes around and led to him securing a 3rd world title on the bounce. And ever since this event was added to the calendar, it has produced many a moment where one could say, yeah, that was the turning point. The defining moment in a season that shifted the momentum back in favour of the eventual victor. But in 2012, it was more than that. Much more. What happened that night in Singapore single-handedly changed the course of Formula One history forever. But wait, hang on a second. Let's flash back to the year 2008. At the end of the season, Honda decided to pull out of Formula One after 2 back-to-back years of underwhelming results. Ahead of the big regulation changes for 2009, Ross Brawn, who was the technical director for Honda at the time, bought the team for a grand total of £1 and renamed the team to Brawn GP. Honda had invested a lot into the 2009 project, so when they decided to quit, the designs for the BGP001 had a solid foundation. Nonetheless, the challenge of getting the car ready for the first pre-season test was not easy. They had to switch to Mercedes engines instead of Honda, which the car had originally been designed to accommodate, meaning significant changes to the rear of the monocoque had to be made. However, when they got to the first pre-season test, they were fast. Lightning fast. Some suspected it was due to them running lighter fuel loads to attract sponsors, but no. This was genuine pace, backed up by their 1-2 in the opening round in Australia, and then going on to win 6 of the first 7 races. As the season progressed, due to their low budget and lack of funding, they slowly fell away as other teams began to catch up. But come the end of the season, that lead they had built for themselves early on in the year turned out to be enough, and Jenson Button became champion of the world. Such a fairy tale success story makes people think, what could this team do with proper investment? Well, that question was about to be answered. At the end of the 2009 season, Brawn GP were acquired by Daimler and Abarth, rebranding to Mercedes GP for the 2010 season. This was the return of the Silver Arrows, with the great Michael Schumacher and young talent Nico Rosberg behind the wheel. Season 1 was pretty underwhelming on paper, but if you put everything into perspective, having taken over Brawn, who were underfunded the previous year, and the development of the 2010 car starting so late, one could have only expected Mercedes to be at a disadvantage. All things considered, this was actually a relatively solid first year. 2011 was another stepping stone in the building process as they made a number of key signings to strengthen their technical department. And finally, in 2012, round 3, Nico Rosberg won the first race for Mercedes in 57 years, also becoming the first German driver to win in a German car in F1 history. This was a huge breakthrough, but not the kind that would immediately turn them into contenders for the championship. Despite that win, 2012 actually ended up being their worst constructors position since their return, finishing in P5, indicating that the team still had some ways to go. Their goal was clear: to assemble the best team of people they possibly could, not just in terms of talent, but also chemistry. How they worked together was just as, if not more important than who worked together. Things were slowly falling into place. The technical department was growing stronger. They were continuously learning more about their car and how to maximize its potential. But there was a piece missing. A piece that Ross Brawn and Niki Lauda spent a lot of time pursuing. A world champion and generational talent on the verge of entering its prime. Schumacher's return to F1 was an amazing story for those wishing to relive the glory days. But unfortunately, he just wasn't the same driver, and Mercedes needed a worthy successor. A driver capable of leading them to multiple world championships. An inspirational figure who could galvanize the team and motivate everyone through his sheer will to win. A fierce, relentless competitor that would leave every ounce of performance on the track and make the difference in crucial moments. At first, it began with a few casual conversations with Nicky about potentially joining the team, to which he was understandably skeptical. Why would he join the 5th to 6th best team at the time when McLaren was still winning races and competing for titles? And the answer was simple. Joining Mercedes was a new challenge, an opportunity to help a new team get back to the front of the grid and maybe, just maybe, win a world championship. But it wasn't until Ross Brawn sat down with Lewis in his mum's kitchen to lay out what they had planned for the future that really convinced him to take the gamble, bringing us back to this moment in Singapore. The morning of that race, Nicky himself revealed that he sent Lewis a text message once again asking if he wanted to join. And when the two crossed paths after the drivers' parade, Lewis didn't even look in his direction. He completely ignored Nicky and walked straight past. So what was his last resort? Quite simply, praying for McLaren's downfall, hoping and wishing that the car would break down while he was leading the race. And surely enough, that's exactly what happened. Immediately, he bombarded the Brit with messages, and 3 weeks later, the contract was signed.
Driver Lewis Hamilton has left the British racing team McLaren and signed for their rivals Mercedes.
Hi, I'm Lewis Hamilton and welcome to my first day at Mercedes-AMG Petronas.
This was one of the most important pieces in the puzzle, is a quote from Nicky about securing Lewis Hamilton. He was ecstatic, and so too was his newly signed driver. But most of the F1 community, well, let's just say about 98% of people thought this move was a career-ending one.
You have moved from McLaren to Mercedes. Is that not a bit like moving from Manchester United to West Ham?
Now, Clarkson's reaction is the one that gets posted the most for his light-hearted humour. But there were some journalists that wrote some pretty hateful stuff, including Lewis's own countrymen. Specifically, this one guy who said, he doesn't know much about racing, and so can't learn from the mistakes of others. Perhaps he thinks that if he fails, he will at least have the consolation of earning loads more money and being a bigger star thanks to his hustling management team that will sell his image. That might make him an international celebrity on a bigger scale than he is, but it will not make him a racing legend. In spite of all the negativity, however, Lewis believed in the path he had chosen, seeing beyond the storm of criticism to a future only he and Mercedes could envision. He trusted his instincts, his raw talent, and the untapped potential of a team others dismissed as a gamble. And so, we enter chapter 1, the first season. A year that can be described as a solid season of learning for Hamilton and Mercedes. It was a campaign marked by points finishes, podiums, pole positions, and an unforgettable drive in Hungary, where Lewis delivered a flawless performance to claim his first win with the team. A victory that felt as much a statement as it was a triumph. His raw pace in qualifying was nothing short of electrifying. During the middle stretch of the season, Lewis qualified on the front row for 7 consecutive races, securing pole on 4 of those occasions. At Silverstone, he delivered a masterclass, taking pole by nearly half a second. But a tyre blowout early on in the race cruelly denied him of a second victory on home soil. Mercedes was still grappling with their Achilles heel of tyre durability, and often found themselves slipping from pole position on Saturday to 4th or 5th on Sunday. Yet, on the rare weekends when they managed to tame their tyre troubles, the W04 was a weapon. And with the combination of Lewis and Nico behind the wheel, it forced Red Bull into relentless development of their 2013 package. This was the perfect scenario for the Silver Arrows, since their pace was somewhat of a red herring. It threw the competition completely off kilter and allowed them to gain a bigger advantage with their 2014 car. For Mercedes, it was a year of laying the foundation with their new star. For Lewis, that his faith in this new chapter had not been misplaced, and that his greatest triumphs were still to come. The turbo hybrid era started with a bang. Qualifying for the Australian Grand Prix was super entertaining, as the rain made things more unpredictable. Hometown favourite Ricciardo strung together a sensational lap, only to get pipped by Hamilton right at the end. His fortunes during the race were less favourable, as he was forced to retire with a power unit failure. However, considering the dominant fashion in which his teammate won, the disappointment would only last for a moment. This car, the W05, was the class of the field, and Lewis's gamble had paid off, big time. He would go on to win the next race in Malaysia in utterly dominant fashion. This season was set to be an all-time classic, a championship battle between not just two teammates, but also childhood friends. For years, Hamilton and Rosberg shared the same piece of tarmac, raced alongside each other in the same junior categories. and now it was time to perform on the biggest stage of all. Bahrain, the duel in the desert. 2 silver arrows going for gold. One of the greatest wheel-to-wheel battles of this generation took place under the lights in Sakir. A pure masterclass in attacking, defending, overtaking, car positioning. Essentially, textbook racing 101. Hamilton displayed masterful IQ, somehow keeping Rosberg behind while being on a harder compound of tyre. How was he doing this? Well, put simply, he was just too good. Perfect car placement, silky smooth switchbacks left, right and centre. As a fan, it was a sight to behold, but for the team, it was stress from start to finish. Lewis continued his run of form with another dominant win in China, and then another closely contested race in Spain, taking the lead of the championship for the first time that season. Heading into Monaco, he was looking to build on that run of form. First set of runs in Q3, Rosberg takes provisional pole, which automatically gave him the upper hand. If anything went wrong on the final set of runs, be it someone causing a red flag or double waved yellows right at the end of the session, it would effectively guarantee Nico pole position. And so, he decided to take matters into his own hands.
Will he stay there?
Let's see what this first sector gives us. It's marginally
Oh no, he's gone straight on, he's gone straight on!
This was the moment the gloves truly came off. A once close friendship unraveled in mere seconds. Or perhaps, to be more accurate, Monaco 2014 was the breaking point. The truth is, tensions had been simmering long before that. In Bahrain, Rosberg pushed the boundaries by using banned engine modes to chase victory. In Spain, Hamilton did the same, but this time in defense. With the championship on the line, neither driver hesitated to exploit every possible grey area for even the smallest advantage. Predictably, Nico triumphed in Monaco. Lewis would go winless for a few more races, retiring in Canada and finishing second in Austria. So, arriving back home for the British Grand Prix, he was keen to make amends, not just for the last few races, but also the lost win in 2013. However, qualifying was a disaster. The mixed conditions made it very difficult to predict whether it was even worth setting a lap. The first 2 sectors were very damp, but the final one was bone dry. Drivers started finding seconds worth of time. Hülkenberg went fastest, followed by Vettel, and then Rosberg. So, where was Hamilton? He was in the pit lane, down in 6th. He decided to abort that final lap where everyone found huge improvements. And that was that. He only had himself to blame. But this wasn't the Hamilton of old. Instead of dwelling on the disappointment, he came back the next day with renewed focus, determined to deliver something extraordinary. And he did. His race pace was relentless, catching Rosberg on the prime tyres before his teammate's retirement sealed the deal. That win, his second at Silverstone, was just as special as his first, powered by the roar of the home crowd, and 6 years to the day since his 2008 triumph. The gap in the championship was slashed to just 4 points. Momentum, though, is fragile. A brake failure in Germany and an engine blowout in Hungary during qualifying left Hamilton devastated as the summer break loomed. In Belgium, his teammate took him out of the race. It seemed as though nothing could go his way. With Rosberg finishing second, the championship lead increased to 29 points. Hamilton's season needed saving, and he responded with fire. 5 consecutive wins followed, with Singapore serving as the turning point, a circuit that symbolized the faith he'd placed in the team 2 years earlier. This time, it rewarded him once again, as he reclaimed the championship lead. Rosberg answered back in Brazil, cutting the gap down to 17 points, and setting the stage for an epic finale in Abu Dhabi. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Double points were on offer, meaning Lewis needed to finish at least second place to secure his second world championship. Nico delivered under pressure, taking pole position on Saturday. All the Brit had to do was follow him home for a safe 1-2, and the title was his. But that's not how Lewis Hamilton is wired. The second the lights went out, he took off like a rocket, and after that moment, he never looked back.
It's not Rosberg, it's Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world in 2014.
World champion! Oh my God, I can't believe it!
This was his moment. A season filled with adversity, transformed into a title. And yes, Nico suffered power unit issues midway through the race, but in truth, it likely wouldn't have changed the outcome. When the pressure was at its absolute peak, Hamilton always seemed to find another gear. Just look at the times when he seemed down and out. He would roar back stronger than ever, more determined and more unstoppable. 2014 had been a relentless battle, with Lewis and Nico sharing a number of controversial moments both on and off the track. But Abu Dhabi was different. It was the ultimate test of mental fortitude. For a driver like Lewis though, pressure isn't a burden, it's a privilege. And on that day, he rose to the occasion with a kind of brilliance that defines champions. Hamilton was in the form of his life, and true to that form, for the season opener in 2015, he was back with a vengeance. Pole position, fastest lap, and a commanding victory in a tumultuous Australian Grand Prix set the tone for what would eventually go on to be a dominant season. China, he was in a league of his own. Bahrain, he hit the ball out of the park. His teammate got one back in Spain with a superb drive from pole. And then we get to Monaco. Chasing the win that got away from him last year, he smoked his teammates in qualifying, taking pole by well over 3/10, controlled the race beautifully from the onset, and built up a comfortable lead, such that in the likely case of a safety car, he could grant himself the luxury of pitting and still maintaining P1. Mercedes were monitoring the delta he had to Nico, and it showed that Lewis could make a stop and safely come out ahead. But they were wrong. Very wrong. Through no fault of his own, he'd lost the Monaco Grand Prix. It was a gut-wrenching defeat, considering how faultless he was all weekend. To come away with a P3 after driving a perfect race was a tough pill to swallow, but he had to take it on the chin and move forwards. Come back with a bang the next weekend, which is exactly what he did. Another vintage performance in Canada took him to his 4th win of the season. A bit of an off weekend followed in Austria before returning to Silverstone once again. In typical fashion, the British weather cooked up a very unpredictable race, a race that would be won through decision making. Hamilton made the perfect call to switch to intermediates as the rain began to fall, and crossed the line to win his 3rd race at home. Hungary was a bit of a disaster. He lost the lead at turn 1, got desperate, and went off trying to repass his teammate, and he also got a drive-through penalty for running into Ricciardo. He ended up finishing 6th, but extended his championship lead since Rosberg made contact with Daniel right at the end and got a puncture. It was an uncharacteristic slump of a Sunday from Hamilton. He was letting distractions creep in and affect his performance on track. The night before the race, he got a call to go on set for a movie being shot in Hungary from Ridley Scott, to which he happily accepted. In excitement, he didn't get a lot of sleep, maybe around 3 hours worth, before making his way to go and shoot the scene. After that, he headed to the track, started preparing for the race, and suddenly hit a wall of fatigue. Despite Lewis's miraculous talent and supreme confidence, moments like these served as a reminder that even the best are not immune to the weight of their own choices. His superstar lifestyle, filled with glitz, glamour, and opportunities most could only dream of, could occasionally spill over into the racing world. This particular weekend was a lesson in balance, a humbling moment that showed even a driver of his caliber had limits. It was a rare slip-up, but one that undoubtedly shaped his focus and discipline for the races that followed. In Belgium, he returned to winning ways, made it back-to-back victories in Monza. Singapore was a mystery for Mercedes as they quite simply had no pace all weekend. But then, he bounced back in Japan and Sochi. With a 66-point lead with 4 races left, he could mathematically win the championship in Austin. It was a race of attrition from start to finish. Nico drove his heart out, but unfortunately made a tiny mistake that handed the lead to his teammate. Hamilton proceeded to drive flawlessly to the end to become a 3-time world champion.
It is the championship in 2015.
Who could have imagined it? The critics who had scoffed at his decision to leave McLaren for Mercedes were stunned into silence. Just 3 years later, here he was, defying the odds and etching his name into the history books alongside the greatest drivers Formula One has ever seen. This wasn't just another championship, it was the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. For a young black kid from Stevenage who once said he wanted to be like Ayrton Senna, this moment was the culmination of years of dedication, sacrifice, and unwavering belief. Every karting race, every late night at the track, every bit of adversity he had endured, it all led to this, standing on the top step of the podium as a 3-time world champion. He wasn't just living his dream, he was embodying it. In that moment, Lewis had achieved the very thing he had visualized as a kid, watching his hero with stars in his eyes, wondering if he could ever reach those heights. For his teammate, however, it was a bitter defeat. Nonetheless, he rounded out the year incredibly well to build momentum for a better campaign in 2016. Straight out the gate, Rosberg went 4 for 4. He wasn't playing any games. Meanwhile, Hamilton was struggling with race starts and reliability issues. An MGU-H failure in qualifying meant he started the Chinese Grand Prix from the back. As a result, he sustained crash damage and could only finish in P7. In Russia, once again, another issue with the MGU-H during qualifying meant he started the race from P10. It was far from an ideal start, and heading into Spain, he desperately needed to get his season going with a win. He brilliantly took pole, but again, lost the lead at the start. Then gets a tremendous run going through turn 3, goes for the move, and then...
Hamilton's onto the grass, and Hamilton's had a massive crash, and he's crashed into his teammate. The two Mercedes come together.
The infamous crash that defined the Hamilton-Rosberg rivalry. His terrible start to the season had just become his worst nightmare. Total was furious. The blame was pinned directly on him. In fact, things got so bad that they threatened to terminate both of their contracts. In reality though, this was a racing incident. For starters, the reason Hamilton gained so much on his teammate through the long sweeping right-hander is because Rosberg was in the wrong engine mode. Therefore, he was down on power, and as a result, Lewis was 17 kilometers an hour faster at that point in time. So you can't really blame him for going for the move. Equally, you can't really blame Rosberg for defending the inside as aggressively as he did, since Lewis had been just as aggressive many times in the past. Lewis was pretty miffed that he was the one shouldering most of the blame, and as the season progressed, these frustrations became abundantly clear. In Monaco, he got his redemption for 2015 to win his first race of the season, puts together another masterclass in Canada, dedicating the victory to the late Muhammad Ali. In Baku, a poor qualifying left him down in 10th, and he was only able to make his way back up to P5. But after that, Hamilton properly got into his stride. 4 race wins on the bounce. Austria was a last lap thriller. In Silverstone, he equaled Nigel Mansell with his 4th British Grand Prix win. Hungary, he took the championship lead with a brilliant performance from 2nd on the grid. And in Germany, his improved starts helped him gain the upper hand early on, controlled the pace to perfection, and extended the buffer to his teammate to 19 points going into the summer break. Nico would come back all guns blazing. 3 consecutive victories in Belgium, Monza and Singapore helped him regain the lead of the championship by just 8 points. Lewis had a great comeback drive in Belgium after starting from the back due to engine penalties. However, in Monza, he lost the lead at the start again, and Singapore, he just struggled for pace. Rosberg was really taking it to him and applying the pressure. No problem though, it's not like Hamilton hasn't come back from something like this before, and in Malaysia, he responded. Things were looking good for the win, until calamity struck.
Fire at the back of that Mercedes car, his engine has blown, and his chances of winning the Malaysia Grand Prix with it.
Oh no!
This changed everything. Hamilton was on course to take the championship lead by 5 points. Instead, he left with a colossal 33-point deficit with just 5 races to go. He was distraught, devastated. Out of all 8 Mercedes-powered cars on the grid, it seemed as though his were the only ones plagued by never-ending issues. This was a brand new engine, and with such a comfortable lead, he had turned it down to preserve it. Yet, inexplicably, it still failed him. Japan offered a chance for redemption, but a poor start dashed his hopes once again. Then came the final 4 races, and Hamilton was nothing short of sensational. 4 consecutive wins in Austin, Mexico, Brazil, and Abu Dhabi showcased his unrelenting determination, and in the season finale, he gave it everything, even employing tactics such as backing up Rosberg into Verstappen and Vettel in a desperate bid to turn the tables. But it wasn't enough. Nico Rosberg held firm, driving the race of his life to secure his first world championship, a dream realized after years of persistent effort. He had given everything: blood, sweat, tears, and more. Credit where it's due. Despite Hamilton's fortune with reliability, Rosberg capitalized on every opportunity, proving his mettle when it mattered most. And with that crowning moment, Rosberg chose to bow out of Formula 1 at the peak of his career, leaving behind a legacy defined by perseverance, triumph, and a finale that no one would ever forget. With Rosberg's shock retirement, Formula 1 was left reeling. Who would drive alongside Hamilton in 2017? The answer came in the form of Valtteri Bottas, the cool-headed Finnish driver making the leap from Williams to the championship-winning Mercedes team. As Bottas settled into his new role, the sport prepared for a seismic shift. The 2017 season brought sweeping aerodynamic regulation changes designed to emphasize cornering performance over power unit dominance. It was a move aimed at leveling the playing field and bringing Ferrari and Red Bull back into contention. With Ferrari emerging as Mercedes' closest rivals in preseason testing, the stage was set for a fierce battle between 2 giants of the sport, each with their eyes on the ultimate prize. Race 1, Australia. Vettel wins the season opener with a brilliant strategy and great tyre management. Hamilton answers back with a masterful performance in China. Bahrain, Seb produced an incredible drive from P3 to take his 2nd win of the season, followed by Valtteri's first career victory in Sochi. 4 races in, and some fascinating patterns were starting to emerge. Both cars were very similarly matched, but had different philosophies. The Ferrari had a shorter wheelbase, whereas the Mercedes was a much longer wheelbase, meaning the W08 would excel on tracks with lots of high-speed corners like China, but less favourable in the low speed. On the other hand, the SF70H had way better handling through those low-speed sections. In addition, it was much kinder on its tyres compared to the Mercedes, making it the more well-rounded car on Sunday. Hamilton and Bottas were able to secure pole in 3 out of the first 4 races, as the Merc still had a slight engine advantage over the rest of the field, albeit a reduced one, with Ferrari taking a big step compared to 2016. Mercedes were able to energize their tyres more, which was good for getting them into the right operating window in qualifying, but it hurt them during the races where their power advantage was also nullified. So in summary, the Mercedes was better on cooler, power-hungry tracks with lots of high-speed corners, whereas the Ferrari was better on hotter, less power-sensitive tracks with lots of medium to low-speed corners. Spain was a brilliant strategy battle from start to finish. A late virtual safety car allowed both Hamilton and Vettel to make a stop, and for the first time all season, they went wheel to wheel. Things got feisty, on the limit, but ultimately, Lewis came out on top. Both drivers now had 2 wins apiece. Monaco was an off weekend for Hamilton as he finished 7th, with Vettel winning. The gap in the championship now 25 points in the Germans' favour. Lewis took pole in Canada, equaling his hero once again. Hamilton turned his 65th pole position into a masterful victory, while his title rival found himself tangled in an early incident with Verstappen. For Vettel, it became a race of damage limitation, while Hamilton seized the spotlight. A spotlight that would shine brighter than ever a couple weeks later in Baku. Naturally, tensions were beginning to rise. When the margins are so fine, drivers will go to extreme lengths to gain the upper hand, no matter how small. Baku 2017 was a crazy race, and even though Hamilton lost the win due to his headrest being loose, he came out of that weekend with a psychological advantage over his rival. Austria was a bit of an off weekend. A 5-place grid penalty for a gearbox change after qualifying meant he could only salvage a P4 while his teammate went on to win. And in the lead up to his home race, he went on holiday to take his mind off racing for a bit. This coincided with an event F1 had organised in London to build up hype for the weekend. And Hamilton's no-show didn't go down well. The media and critics attacked him for being selfish, and whether it was justified or not, it didn't change the fact that people were upset, some being his own fans. In spite of the backlash though, he destroyed everyone on Saturday, poled by half a second to P2, and 7/10 to his championship rival. The race was another masterclass, equaling Jim Clark and Alain Prost for the most British Grand Prix wins in F1 history, completely silencing those who were judging his lifestyle and questioning his commitment and character. The track layout at the Hungaroring suited the Ferrari perfectly. High downforce, lots of low-speed corners, and hot track temperatures, allowing Vettel and Raikkonen to secure a 1-2 finish. Hamilton has always been a master around this circuit. It's where he famously claimed his first race victory for Mercedes. While he didn't have a great qualifying nor a brilliant start, he managed to find his footing again midway through the race. And as he homed in on his teammate, he felt the pace he had would be enough to potentially catch the red cars. So, he requested to be allowed through and proposed to give the position back to Valtteri if he couldn't get the job done. Mercedes agreed. Hamilton got close, but passing proved too difficult due to the dirty air. Sticking to his word, he honoured that agreement and let Bottas through at the final corner. Many people in the moment questioned whether those 3 points he gave up would cost him the championship in the end. But Lewis didn't see it that way. He saw the bigger picture. After 3 years of internal beefing with Rosberg, keeping the peace with his new teammate was a big priority. It was a wise move. Burning bridges this early on was not a price worth paying for, especially not over 3 points. With that, the first half of the season came to a close, and Vettel extended his gap in the championship to 14 points. He had been phenomenal up until this point, and the pressure was on Hamilton to rise to the challenge after the summer break. The Belgian Grand Prix, Lewis's 200th race in Formula 1. Here would mark the start of his championship fightback. Under immense pressure, he managed to fend off the threat from Vettel using some insane racing IQ. After Perez and Ocon's collision, the safety car was deployed. On the lap that it came into the pits, Hamilton bolted early at Blanchimont to try and escape his rival, but a mistake at the first corner allowed Seb to close in. Lewis checks his mirror and notices how close Vettel is, so he lifts off the throttle ever so slightly going through a rouge, allowing the German to close in. But the genius in doing this only became evident down the Kemmel Straight. Since Vettel was essentially right on Hamilton's gearbox by Radion, he had to pull out of the slipstream too early and therefore lost momentum. Knowing the Mercedes had the superior straight-line speed thanks to their engine advantage, Lewis did this intentionally to prevent Seb from slipstreaming him all the way down the straight, like how Kimi did to Bottas that very same race. This was a supremely underrated win from Hamilton, where he alone made the difference. Managing to defend against Vettel like that, with tyres that were 2 compounds harder, was ridiculous. Such quick thinking during those few seconds between La Source and Eau Rouge was the definition of playing 4D chess. Qualifying in Monza would play to his strengths once again, as the session took place in treacherous conditions. Hamilton was on a completely different level, sailing to pole by a full 1.2 seconds faster than the next closest challenger. In addition, he was well over 2 seconds quicker than his teammate and the 2 Ferrari drivers. All this while breaking Michael Schumacher's record for the most poles in F1 history. The race was dry, and once he got a good start, the win was a formality. His confidence was at an all-time high. However, expectations needed to be managed heading into Singapore, traditionally a bogey track for Mercedes, a circuit where Ferrari and Red Bull were expected to shine. But what unfolded was nothing short of chaos. It was one of the few, but crucial title-defining moments. Seb defended hard against Max to prevent him passing at turn 1, but in the end, it only backfired. Ferrari's pain became Hamilton's gain, as he capitalized perfectly on yet another dramatic momentum shift under the lights at the Marina Bay circuit. He was on a roll, 3 wins on the bounce, making absolutely no mistakes, just clinical performance after clinical performance. For Vettel fans, Singapore was a tough blow to take, but little did they know his luck was about to get even worse. In Malaysia, an engine issue prevents him from setting a time in Q1, and he's forced to start from the back of the grid. And in Japan, starting on the front row, a problem with his spark plug forces him to retire in the early stages of the race. Meanwhile, Hamilton is just racking up the big points. Suzuka was the final nail in the coffin for the championship, as Seb was now 59 points down with 4 races to go. Austin was a masterclass from Lewis, as Mercedes secured the Constructors' Championship. And going into Mexico, he could mathematically wrap up the title. Vettel had a messy start, making contact with both Verstappen and Hamilton. The Mercedes driver ended up getting a puncture and floor damage which hindered his pace. Despite this, however, he managed to fight back and position himself to cross the line for another world title.
He has been the force, and he crosses the line now to become the 4-time world champion.
2017 was the year of transformation. After a difficult loss the previous season, he entered the new one with a different approach, bettering himself physically, mentally, and spiritually as well. That pursuit of perfection, combined with unwavering belief in himself, led to one of his best championship campaigns to date. Having to fight off the threat from a resurgent Ferrari made the triumph all the more sweet. If we're being honest, this championship should have gone down to the final race, but Vettel was let down by poor reliability and a few mistakes here and there. Equally though, Hamilton himself had a pretty shaky start to the season. Nevertheless, both drivers were utterly sublime. The levels of driving prowess they put on display were just remarkable. They were by far and away the best drivers on the grid. And just imagine if Ferrari had an engine equally as good as the Mercedes, or even better. Well, Formula 1 would only need to wait around 3 months to see that scenario play out. 2018 was set up to be one of the all-time great seasons. 2 4-time world champions fighting for a 5th, driving for the 2 most iconic brands in the sport. Ahead of the season, Ferrari extended the wheelbase of their car. Not to the extent of Mercedes, but enough to increase the downforce generating under the floor. This was to address the weakness of high-speed cornering performance they struggled with the previous year. Additionally, they now had their own party mode that could rival the AMG. On the whole, the SF71H was a formidable machine, and Ferrari had a real shot at winning both titles. Now what it came down to was how good the drivers were in a direct head-to-head. Hamilton draws first blood in qualifying with a blistering lap in Australia. However, a Mercedes strategy software error cost him the victory as Vettel picked up the pieces. The German made it back-to-back wins with a beautiful Bahrain drive from pole, holding off a charging Bottas while on old tyres. Lewis was forced to take a 5-place grid penalty for taking a new gearbox and had to settle for P3. China was a chaotic weekend, and the 2 championship protagonists could only manage 4th and 8th. Mercedes failed to pit Hamilton under the safety car, which was a pretty big strategy error, since Ricciardo went on to win the race with a supreme comeback drive. As much as this was a head-to-head between Ferrari and Mercedes, Red Bull were also growing stronger. Early on, they looked as though they were going to be contenders, making it a 3-way fight. However, a controversial collision in Baku halted that momentum. This moment brought out the safety car, which was perfect for Valtteri Bottas, who was still yet to make his mandatory pit stop. He fits the ultra-soft tyres, and the 3 behind him also take the opportunity to fit new tyres. The order is now Bottas, Vettel, Hamilton, Raikkonen. Safety car pulls in, and Seb dives down the inside of Valtteri, locks up badly and drops down to 5th. It was all looking good for Bottas to claim Mercedes' first win of the season. until a piece of debris gave him a puncture and ended his race. Lewis inherited the victory and humbly accepted that it should have been his teammate on the top step. Somehow though, he was in the lead of the championship after this race. Despite all the trials and tribulations of the first 3 races, his results were the most consistent out of the top 6. Mercedes answered back to Ferrari's flying start with a 1-2 in Spain, before the Scuderia gained the upper hand once again in Monaco. The Red Bull was the best car that day, with Ricciardo getting his redemption for 2016. Canada was another rough weekend for Lewis. A bird got stuck in his brake drum in Q3, causing him to qualify P4, but only 2/10 off the pace. In the race, he suffered even more technical issues and limped home in P5. Meanwhile, Vettel was cruising out in front to claim his 3rd victory of the season. The pendulum swung back to Mercedes in France. Hamilton took a comfortable victory as Vettel's first lap crash caused him to finish in 5th. And in Austria, unreliability plagued both silver arrows as Max Verstappen claimed his first win of the year, with Raikkonen and Vettel P2 and P3, respectively. Over that 4-race span, the title lead changed hands 4 times, highlighting just how competitive the season was so far. Silverstone was up next, and on that Saturday afternoon, Lewis put together one of his best ever qualifying performances, dancing his way through Copse, Maggots, Beckett's, to claim pole by 44 thousandths of a second. A lap so unbelievably good, he was literally shaking with emotion when he got out of the car. That was a special moment. Somehow, he was able to extract performance from himself that nobody could fathom, probably not even him. Sunday, he didn't get the best start, and to add more insult to injury, Kimi made contact with him and he dropped down to the back. Despite that, the fight back was something special, but not enough to stop Sebastian from winning in his backyard. It was an important victory for him and the Scuderia, a chance to build even more momentum and continue extending their championship lead. However, that's not what happened. Instead, Hamilton went on what might be the best streak of races in his career. Germany. A hydraulics issue in qualifying forces him to start from P14 on the grid with his rival on pole. He charges through the field, and towards the end, when it started to rain, Vettel made a mistake and clumsily rolled into the gravel. This was one of the saddest days for Ferrari fans. What looked like it was going to be an easy locked-in win turned out to be Seb's worst nightmare. Some say since that day, he's never been the same. Lewis drove his heart out. That never say die attitude rewarded him tremendously. Nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, believed he could make a comeback from where he was starting, except Hamilton himself. It was a miracle, and going into Hungary, where the Ferraris were once again the fastest car in the dry, the heavens opened up, allowing Lewis to work his wet weather magic. He would go on to convert that pole into a win before the summer break. Another wet quali session saw him claim pole in Belgium. But now Ferrari had an improved power unit, Vettel would easily claim the lead on the Kemmel Straight and win the race. Monza, however, brought more drama. Ferrari locked out the front row, but their decision not to prioritize Vettel proved costly. In a tense wheel-to-wheel battle with Hamilton, Vettel came off worse, spinning out and losing valuable ground. From there, it became a 2v1 battle for the win, and Mercedes played their cards perfectly. Hamilton was driving at a level far above anybody else, delivering a flawless performance to claim his 2nd victory on Ferrari and Vettel's home turf. First Germany and now Monza. Through the first 14 races, Ferrari undeniably had the better car. And yet, Ferrari trailed by 25 points in the constructors' standings, with Vettel 30 points behind in the drivers' championship. The reason? A cascade of costly errors. In Bahrain, a pit sensor failure caused Raikkonen to leave the box prematurely, injuring a mechanic. In Baku, Vettel's overambitious lunge ended in a massive lockup, dropping him to 4th. In France, a collision with Bottas cost even more points. Then, there was the infamous crash in Germany and the strategic blunder at Monza. Without these mistakes, the standings after round 14 could have looked very different. While some errors were down to carelessness, others were induced by relentless pressure from Hamilton. Races like Italy and Germany showcased his ability to force his rivals into unforced errors. And it wasn't as if Mercedes were flawless either. They missed crucial strategy calls in China and Australia, suffered technical issues in Canada, and endured double retirement in Austria. And yet, despite not having the best car most of the time, Hamilton's otherworldly performances and unrivaled consistency kept Mercedes ahead. He was the difference maker, winning races the car had no business winning and delivering pole positions when it mattered most. And then came Singapore, a track where Ferrari and Red Bull were heavy favourites. But in a season-defining moment, Lewis Hamilton produced what many consider the greatest qualifying lap the sport has ever seen.
Hamilton crosses the line of 1:36.0. Wow, was that fast!
With a single mighty blow, he stunned everybody. Having been nowhere in all the other sessions leading up to Q3, Hamilton unleashed a lap of pure perfection, defying expectations and leaving the entire grid in awe. That moment of magic was brilliantly converted into a win on Sunday. Ferrari, meanwhile, had brought an upgrade that made the car slightly worse, and it remained for the next couple of races which Hamilton won. But as soon as those failed upgrades were removed in Austin, they were fastest once again. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. And just one race later, at the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez, Lewis Hamilton immortalized his name into the history books forever.
Rounds the final corner. It's high fives for Lewis Hamilton, a five-time champion of the world.
This was no ordinary title. For most of the season, Mercedes didn't have the best car. More often than not, Ferrari held the edge in raw pace. Yet through sheer brilliance and racing genius, he found a way to consistently rise above, delivering when the stakes were at their highest and applying pressure so intense that even his fiercest rivals faltered. Luca de Montezemolo, the former Ferrari president, was quoted saying, "This year, Hamilton made the difference in his best season since his debut. He's had his moments of weakness and crisis, but this year, with Ferrari, he would have won." Even he couldn't help but acknowledge Hamilton's greatness, with comments like these reflecting the deep respect he had earned throughout the paddock. 2019 was another shot for Vettel and Ferrari to redeem themselves. Their pre-season testing form was incredibly strong, while Mercedes were having some issues unlocking performance from their car. Issues that Lewis helped to identify and fix before the first race of the season, where they completely dominated. Bahrain was a lucky win for Hamilton, as Ferrari's new star Charles Leclerc dominated from start to finish, until an engine issue stood in his way. China was another one too, same in Baku and Spain. Mercedes were unstoppable. Their momentum was building, confidence growing, but just a few days later, their whole world would fall apart. On May 20th, 2019, the motorsport world mourned the loss of Niki Lauda, the three-time world champion and a pivotal figure in Mercedes' modern success. His relentless pursuit and conviction played a crucial role in convincing Hamilton to join Mercedes, a decision that led to unprecedented success for both driver and team. Lewis often credited Niki's influence and mentorship as significant factors in his achievements with Mercedes. The Austrian's death sent a ripple effect throughout the paddock. Everybody was deeply affected, but especially those within Mercedes. And heading into the Monaco Grand Prix, they were hungrier than ever to pay homage to the man who was the heart and soul of the team. Hamilton would take pole, bursting out with emotion in Parc Fermé, and led the race from start to finish. However, Mercedes made a strategy error by putting him on medium tyres instead of hards. Getting those tyres to the end while keeping a charging Max Verstappen behind would have been too much to bear for any driver on the grid apart from Lewis Hamilton. Despite the tyres being completely gone and contact late in the race with the Dutchman, he crossed the line to win the Grand Prix, dedicating the victory to the one and only Niki Lauda. Mercedes would continue their great run of form in Canada. Ferrari, however, proved to be a much stronger threat, and in what was considered an unjust penalty by many at the time, Hamilton would claim the win, despite Vettel crossing the line in first. And while the unpopular opinion was that the stewards made the right decision, the amount of backlash the sport received inadvertently caused the standard of stewarding to become a lot more lenient. France was another dominant one too for the Silver Arrows, making it an 8-race win streak. A streak that was ended by Max Verstappen in Austria, with a brilliant performance in his 4th season with Red Bull. Mercedes bounced back in Silverstone, with Hamilton claiming a record 6th British Grand Prix victory with the fastest lap right to the end with old tyres. Germany was their worst possible nightmare. But in Hungary, the team produced a strategic masterclass, with Lewis hunting down Max down for the win. After the summer break, however, Mercedes didn't have it all their own way. What started out as a very uncompetitive year turned into one of the most hotly contested finishes to a season in a long time. 3 different teams were capable of fighting for victories. Red Bull on a few tracks that suited their car characteristics. Mercedes were up there consistently as they carried over the advantage from the first half. And Ferrari had a majorly improved power unit, enabling them to win the first 3 races after the break. Then Mercedes came back with a 1-2 in Sochi and won the Constructors in Japan. Mexico was one of the most evenly contested races amongst the top 3 teams, with Lewis's superior tyre management abilities powering him to a 10th win of the year. And 1 week later, at one of his favourite tracks, he would become champion of the world for a 6th time.
Another championship to his collection. He's got 6 appeal in Austin. It's Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
Hamilton's 6th World Championship was a testament to his brilliance, as well as the dominance of the partnership he had forged with Mercedes. Critics often pointed to the lack of competition for much of the season, but that wasn't Lewis's or the team's fault. It was the result of their unrelenting pursuit of perfection. Week after week, they raised the bar, leaving their rivals to scramble in their wake. But the final 9 races told a different story. If the season had begun with the intensity and competitiveness of those closing rounds, 2019 would undoubtedly have been remembered as one of the greatest battles in Formula 1 history. Only one man now had more championships than him. And heading into 2020, the goal was as clear as day. Achieve a feat that many thought would never be seen again. Or at least, not so soon. Beat Michael Schumacher's 91 wins and equal his record of 7 World Championships. It was an unprecedented year, not just for Formula 1, but the entire world. The global pandemic forced everyone into lockdown, and the season wouldn't officially begin until early January. With the end of last year being so competitive, everybody expected 2020 to be an all-timer. But instead, it's all the fall of Ferrari. Red Bull struggled with a number of technical issues with their RB16, and Mercedes produced the greatest car in Formula 1 history, the W11. And with Hamilton behind the wheel, it was a formidable combination. His first race of the season was a bit messy, but after that, he was nearly unbeatable. The pole lap in Styria was staggering. Hungary, he was untouchable. Not even a blown tyre could stop him winning a 7th British Grand Prix on 3 wheels. Had the crowd been there, you could only imagine what the atmosphere would have been like. Heavy tyre degradation for the next Silverstone event prevented him from making it back-to-back wins, as Verstappen took Red Bull to their first win of the year. In Spain, he was clinical. In Spa, outqualified everyone by half a second and dominated the race, dedicating the victory to the late Chadwick Boseman. Monza, he looked set for another win, but he was given a penalty for entering the pit lane just as it was closing. As a result, he received a 10-second stop-go penalty, but the fight back to 7th in just a few laps was very impressive. Russia, he also got a 10-second penalty for doing practice starts in the wrong place, but apart from that, he was faultless, winning in Mugello, then equaling Michael's record of 91 wins at the Nürburgring, and beating it in Portimao, taking victory in Imola, and finally, the Turkish Grand Prix. One of his best ever performances, on a weekend where Mercedes had been consistently off the pace, he mastered the slippery conditions better than anyone else. And the rest, as they say, is history.
The World Championship record is equalled. Lewis Hamilton wins the Turkish Grand Prix and is a 7-time champion of the world.
In a season like no other, he edged his name alongside Michael Schumacher at the summit of Formula 1. For his monumental achievements, Hamilton was awarded a knighthood, which was fitting for a driver who had not only redefined excellence on the track, but had also transformed the sport off it. His journey with Mercedes exemplified this transformation. When he joined the team in 2013, they were struggling to consistently score points, let alone fight for championships. But through his leadership, relentless drive, and talent that was unmatched, he helped elevate Mercedes into one of the most dominant teams sports has ever seen. But Hamilton's contributions extended far beyond the racetrack. In a year marked by tragic death of George Floyd, Lewis became a powerful voice for change, using his platform to speak out against racism and the abuse he had faced throughout his career and life. Mercedes joined him in the fight, adopting the iconic black livery and black overalls as a statement of solidarity and call for equality. That same determination and resilience that drove him to overcome systemic barriers and reach the pinnacle of the sport also fueled his drive to break records. Hamilton wasn't just a racer, he was a trailblazer, an icon, an inspiration to millions. The final 3 races saw him win 1 before falling victim to the virus, and upon his return in Abu Dhabi, he could only manage P3. Meanwhile, Max Verstappen and Red Bull ended the year on a high. Their increasing momentum only made them more of a threat for the 2021 season. Most people expected them to be in the fight for a few more wins, but not come close to the championship. Well, those people were in for a shock. It would end up being arguably the greatest head-to-head championship battle of all time. One driver chasing a record-breaking 8th title, and his challenger, a man searching for his first ever championship. Lewis Hamilton versus Max Verstappen was the personification of when the unstoppable force meets the immovable object. Bahrain, Red Bull were the faster car all weekend, but Lewis was able to narrowly edge the victory in a brilliant defensive performance. Imola, Verstappen gave no quarter to a championship rival and answered back with his first victory of the year. Hamilton uncharacteristically made a mistake and was fortunate to be bailed out with a red flag. But Lady Luck is a part of racing, and that day it was on his side, as he managed to salvage a P2 in what could have been a much worse result. He bounced back at the next 2 rounds in Portugal and Spain before the Red Bull entered a league of its own. Monaco, Max dominated. Baku, they were dominating until his tyre blew out. And that was also the day Lewis accidentally hit the wrong button while upshifting that sent him straight on into the runoff. Again, very unlike him to make such a costly error at the time when he could have gained a lot of points on Verstappen. But with the race being this early on in the season, there were still a lot of points up for grabs. Red Bull was simply too good for the next few races. France was a close contest, but the back-to-back races in Austria helped Max extend his advantage in the championship to 32 points. Unlike 2017 or 2018, this combination actually looked super robust. Verstappen wasn't making many mistakes, and Red Bull's car was just getting better. Consistent upgrades were being brought, race after race, whereas Mercedes were falling behind. The British Grand Prix was up next, and they managed to make a decent step of performance to draw level with Red Bull. Hamilton produced a Silverstone special to take pole for the sprint, but lost the lead at the start and eventually the win. On race day, however, he didn't want to let Max get away with leading on the first lap. He simply had to get aggressive and match Verstappen's no-yield approach. Throughout the first few corners, they're battling hard. Coming out of Luffield, Hamilton gets a great run on the exit and closes down on the old start-finish straight. They head up to Copse, and Lewis goes for the opportunity to pass, and
Verstappen is out of the race, and that's a big crash!
The first major collision of the season. And this was a long time coming. It was inevitable. Max was out of the race, and somehow Lewis wasn't. Contact like that usually results in both drivers' races ending. But Verstappen was just unlucky in this scenario. Thankfully, he was okay after being checked, and the race continued with Leclerc in the lead. Hamilton was given a 10-second penalty for causing a collision, to which many fans were outraged. Mainly because of the outcome, they didn't think it was harsh enough. Despite the penalty, however, Lewis fought his way back to the front to win his 8th British Grand Prix. Headed into Hungary, even more bad luck would plague Verstappen, as he was taken out at the start. But Mercedes failed to call Hamilton in at the right time, a crucial strategy error that forced him to pull off another comeback drive, but on a track that's far more difficult to overtake on. He managed to make it to the podium, but you could see how exhausted he looked. The long-term effects of the virus he caught at the end of 2020 were taking their toll on him. At this point, however, he had claimed the lead of the championship. Red Bull responded with pole in Belgium, and half points were weirdly awarded for no racing. A dominant victory followed in Zandvoort before Monza, where the two came to blows once again. In Russia, Lewis was phenomenal, becoming the first ever driver to achieve 100 race wins in Formula 1. In Turkey, he took pole, but had a 10-place grid penalty for changing engine components and could only recover to P5. Austin was a pure masterclass from Hamilton and Verstappen, which showed how ridiculously clear they were of the rest. Max made it back-to-back wins in Mexico, with the track suiting their car's characteristics. And with a 19-point deficit to Verstappen in the championship, most people had written Hamilton off. But he was determined to fight back. What this man did in the last 4 races of 2021 is by far and away the most clutch set of performances of his career, and possibly even all time. Brazil. He takes pole by a huge margin, but is later disqualified for failing the rear wing checks by 0.2 of a millimeter. A brilliant fight back from last to 5th in the sprint meant that he would start the Grand Prix from P10, and with the pace he had, it was a genuine possibility he'd be able to win. He starts tearing through the pack, passing car after car after car, reminiscent of his tremendous comeback drive in Turkey GP2. Finally, he reaches Verstappen and goes for a move. He's ahead going in, but the Dutchman rolls off the speed and forces him completely off the track. Of course, Max isn't given a penalty, and Lewis has to try again. He dummies Verstappen, forcing him into a defensive position, compromising his line through the center S's, and down the straight, Hamilton passes before the corner. From there, he sailed off into the Brazilian sunset, winning in style. One thing people were reminded of that day was the fact that you can never consider Lewis to be down and out, ever. In a must-win situation where any other driver would crumble, he elevated to a level never seen before. This win was significant, not just in terms of his fight back through the field, mind you, without any interventions from a safety car or red flag, just sheer speed alone, but also its significance. In order to win this championship, he would need to win every single race for the remainder of the season. And what better way to reignite that title campaign than a weekend where he went from last to first in the face of adversity and biased stewarding. Qatar, he dominated. Perfect pole lap, flawless in the race. Just a vintage Hamilton weekend. Jeddah was up next, and Verstappen was on the flyer. He desperately needed to take pole to stop his rival's momentum. But at the final corner, things took a turn for the worse. The race itself was a roller coaster, mainly because of Max's driving. That desperation to maintain the lead at all costs was getting out of hand. Lewis was forced to take evading action in every wheel-to-wheel encounter. In addition, Verstappen brake tested him and broke his front wing, an offense that earned him a 10-second time penalty, which was far too lenient. Nonetheless, Hamilton still managed to win and set the fastest lap, even with a broken wing, to set up a final race title decider with the two equal on points. Max takes pole, but Lewis gets him at the start. The Dutchman then passes him again at turn 6, and Hamilton is forced to take to the runoff. In this instance, he should have given the place back since the move was clean. From there, Lewis dominated the race, no matter what Red Bull threw his way. On that day, he was peerless. He simply outdrove Verstappen in the most important race of his career. On course to win an 8th World Championship, it seemed as though nothing could stand in his way. On lap 53, Nicholas Latifi hit the wall at turn 14, bringing out the safety car. Mercedes decided to leave Hamilton out as they predicted the race would finish under the safety car. Red Bull, on the other hand, with nothing to lose, make a stop for a fresh set of soft tyres. As soon as the pack bunched up, the team were on the phone to Michael Massey, begging him to restart the race as soon as possible. But Latifi's car and the debris was still being cleared up until lap 56. At which point, at the start of lap 57, the message for lapped cars to overtake was sent, but only for the cars between Lewis and Max. In addition, those lapped cars weren't even given the chance to catch the back of the pack. And finally, the message for the safety car coming in at the end of the lap was sent, which went completely against the rulebook. Essentially, Massey was making it up to try and get a last lap shootout between Hamilton and Verstappen, knowing full well that one driver was fighting with both hands tied behind his back. And in the blink of an eye, it was over. The events of December 12, 2021 will forever remain a stain on Formula One's history. Lewis Hamilton, on the brink of a record-breaking 8th World Championship, was denied by a decision that defied the very rulebook designed to uphold fair competition. Mercedes appealed, rightfully arguing that the safety car protocols had been blatantly ignored, but their objections were dismissed. It was clear that the FIA had no intention of acknowledging their error, knowing full well the optics of overturning the result would be damaging to their image. The result was a devastating betrayal, choosing spectacle over sport, entertainment over ethics, leaving a sour taste that lingers to this day. And while it's true that Verstappen faced moments of bad luck throughout the season, that's simply part of sport. If championships were awarded based on who endured the most misfortune, Hamilton would be the 2016 world champion. But there's a big difference between the randomness of luck and the deliberate breaking of the rules. The latter is what made the event in Abu Dhabi so distasteful. Yet, in the face of this heartbreak, Sir Lewis Hamilton showed an extraordinary level of grace and composure. With the eyes of over 100 million people on him, he did what no other driver on the grid might have been capable of. He got up, walked over, and congratulated Max Verstappen, held his head high, and carried the weight of the injustice with dignity. Reflecting on the moment, he later said, "These next 50 meters that I walk is where I either fall to the ground and die, or rise up." And rise up he did. Even George Lucas, creator of some of the most enduring stories of heroism, said, "Heroes are bigger than champions." And this was Lewis's hero moment. It was a display of class and character that transcended the sport itself, showing the world what true greatness looks like, not just in victory, but in the most crushing moments of defeat. Returning in 2022, Hamilton was eager to get redemption for the injustice of 2021 and reclaim his place at the top of Formula One. With the sport transitioning to ground effect cars, the potential for a major shakeup was clear. One team could gain an early advantage and dominate. Mercedes, on paper, had designed a very fast car, but reality told a different story. On track, the car was plagued with unpredictable behavior and chronic porpoising issues, leaving Hamilton unable to challenge for the championship. Meanwhile, Red Bull and Ferrari emerged with the best cars on the grid, leaving Mercedes playing catch-up the entire time. Hamilton's brilliance still shone through a few times. He came close to winning on several occasions and secured a handful of podiums. But for the first time in his career, he ended the season without a victory. It was a sobering reminder of just how extraordinary his standards were and the legacy he had built. 2023 offered glimpses of hope with a stunning pole position in Hungary, but Red Bull's dominance continued unabated. His efforts, though, were nothing short of remarkable, finishing third in the championship with a W14, a car that was on average only the third or fourth fastest on the grid. His skill was never in question, but the car simply wasn't up to his level. Frustrations began to surface. For the second consecutive season, Mercedes failed to act on Hamilton's feedback regarding car development. His relentless testing and on-track experiments to identify weaknesses with the car felt increasingly futile, as the team seemed unwilling to implement the changes he had highlighted. Hamilton began to sense a shift within the team, whispers of a long-term future that didn't include him. Higher-ups at Mercedes appeared to be preparing for the future, with their sights set on bringing in the young prodigy, Kimi Antonelli. For Lewis, the writing was on the wall. Never one to let others dictate his fate, Hamilton faced a decision he never thought he'd have to make in his life: to leave Mercedes. The news sent shockwaves throughout the motorsport world. After over a decade with Mercedes, Hamilton chose to walk away, joining Ferrari in what is and will likely forever be the biggest driver transfer in Formula One history. The reasoning became clear as details emerged. Mercedes had offered only a one-year contract extension with an optional year for 2025, far from the commitment he deserved. In contrast, Ferrari presented a 3-year deal with an ambassadorship, a package that recognized both his value on track and his status as the sport's greatest driver. For Hamilton, the decision wasn't just about contracts, it was about legacy. While it was heartbreaking to part ways with a team he had helped build into a powerhouse, it was Ferrari who saw an opportunity to seize the moment. All this, and the season hadn't even started yet. The W15 showed little promise initially, mirroring the struggles of its two predecessors in the ground effect era. Though it gradually improved over time, the car still fell short of delivering consistent performance. A few chances to claim victory arose, but fate seemed determined to keep them out of reach. Mercedes finally broke their winless streak in Austria, with George Russell securing their first triumph of the year. Meanwhile, in the top 4 teams, the only other driver yet to win a Grand Prix was Oscar Piastri, and even he managed to claim a sprint race victory in 2023 as a rookie. For Hamilton, however, the drought stretched on. Ever since Abu Dhabi in 2021, he hadn't tasted victory, and the haunting memories of that day continued to linger, gnawing at his confidence. Was he still good enough? Had Father Time finally caught up with him? These doubts crept in, feeding an unshakable sense of imposter syndrome. But then came the British Grand Prix, a weekend charged with emotion as Hamilton prepared for his final home race with Mercedes. Qualifying on the front row was a promising start, and with rain in the forecast, there was a glimmer of hope that this could finally be his day. As the race unfolded, he made a decent start, holding P2 in the opening laps. When the rain intensified, Hamilton surged into the lead on the hangar straight, only to lose it again to the charging McLarens. But his decision to pit for intermediates at just the right moment proved critical, and once the track dried, he undercut Norris in a thrilling duel and regained the lead. From there, it was a masterclass in race management, and after 945 days of waiting, Hamilton crossed the line to win his 9th British Grand Prix.
Lewis Hamilton wins the British Grand Prix! What a victory! Hamilton is back!
Like a phoenix rising from the ashes, Lewis Hamilton was reborn. He was overwhelmed with emotion. Tears on the radio, tears with his father, tears on the podium. This was more than just a victory. It was a triumph over adversity, a reclaiming of the joy and glory that eluded him for so long. To have endured the depths of despair, from the heartbreak of Abu Dhabi to the frustration of uncompetitive seasons, and to finally stand on the top step of the podium again was nothing short of poetic. The weight of those years, the doubts, the struggles, all of it came pouring out in that moment. And to win in front of his home crowd on the straight named after him made it all the more special. He was back, and the world knew it too. His final drive from P16 to P4 in Abu Dhabi 2024 was a fitting way to sign off. A masterclass of skill and determination that proved, even at the twilight of his career, Lewis still had the magic that made him a legend. As we prepare to witness the final chapter of this extraordinary journey, it's impossible not to reflect on the Mercedes era, a partnership that redefined what could be achieved in Formula One. The greatest driver-team combination in the sport's history, forged from a leap of faith, evolved into a legacy written into the history books. Hamilton's evolution over the years mirrored that of the team he helped transform. Together, they were more than just winners. They were pioneers. Mercedes' willingness to stand by Hamilton as he championed diversity, inclusion, and equality elevated their partnership beyond racing. From the roar of the home crowd at Silverstone to the heartbreaks and triumphs that defined this era, the memories created will endure in the hearts of those who witnessed this remarkable story forever. Lewis Hamilton's journey isn't just a tale of championships. It's a story of resilience, greatness, and the unbreakable bond between a driver, a team, and the pursuit of a legacy that will inspire for generations to come. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, be sure to drop a like, share this around with friends, and subscribe to the channel if you're new to get my latest videos in the future. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.
I'm working on a masterpiece, and I haven't quite finished it yet.